Stop inventing things. P. Diddy is a good man and I have a great job. You're going crazy. He would never do that to you.
Jasmine Clark, the daughter of P. Diddy's private driver, grew up surrounded by glamour and luxury, but tragically became a victim of one of the darkest schemes in the industry, allegedly led by P. Diddy. She shares her story of the nightmares she endured, revealing the atrocities she faced at the hands of the rapper and his powerful friends. Despite telling her father about the terrible things Diddy did to her in a dark room, he either ignored her or pretended not to believe her to protect his well-paying job. The trauma Jasmine experienced shaped her past and continues to affect her life to this day. After years of silence, she is finally ready to expose the dark secrets of this scheme that others were too afraid to reveal. Before we dive into this heartbreaking story, make sure to subscribe to the channel for more eye-opening stories like this one. Don't forget to share this video to help expose the truth about P. Diddy and warn others about his actions. Jasmine's story begins like this.
My name is Jasmine Clark, and this is my story. I ask that you don't judge me or call me a liar because, even now, I still attend therapy to cope with everything that happened to me. My childhood was far from ordinary. My father, Thomas Clark, worked as P. Diddy's personal driver, and I grew up surrounded by luxury, expensive cars, lavish mansions, and parties full of celebrities like Jay-Z and Beyoncé. At first, it felt like a fairy tale, with Diddy treating me like family, calling me the daughter he never had, and showering me with expensive gifts. My father always said his job provided us with everything we had, and as a child, I believed him. But over time, I began to notice the darker side of that world. Not all parties were happy, not all smiles were genuine, and Diddy and his powerful friends, whom I once saw as idols, began watching me in ways I didn't understand. They were overly kind, asked strange personal questions, and made me feel uneasy in ways I couldn't explain back then. What once seemed like a dream slowly revealed itself to be a nightmare. Whenever I was alone with them, I was still too young to fully understand what was happening, but even at that age something inside me knew something was wrong. It wasn't just the glamour, there was something dark in that world, something that I still couldn't fully see, but that was about to reveal itself. At the time I trusted my father, he was my hero, my safe haven. But that confidence would begin to be shaken as the years went by, and what I discovered afterwards marked me forever. As I got older, my closeness with P. Diddy and his friends began to change. At first they treated me like a curious little girl, someone who ran down the halls of mansions and asked innocent questions about their glamorous lives. They gave me nicknames, laughed at my jokes, and showered me with gifts. But when I reached 12 years old, I started to notice that the way they looked at me had changed. Diddy started asking me to be close to him. At events always by my father's side, he said I was special, that I brought luck, but at the same time there was a strangeness in his voice, as if his words had a weight that I didn't understand. His relationship with me seemed to change when no one was looking, when we were alone in a room, or he passed me discreetly at a party. I felt something strange in the air, a tension that hadn't been there before. There were also dark rooms, that's what I called the places he and his friends took me sometimes during these parties. They often asked me to accompany them, always using a friendly tone, as if it were just a joke. These rooms were far from the loud music and bright party lights, quiet, dark spaces where the atmosphere felt heavy. At first, I didn't understand why I was there. They laughed, asked me strange questions, and said things I couldn't comprehend. But over time, the touches began, their words became more suggestive, and their laughter turned into something far more disturbing. When I tried to leave or pull away, they would say things like, "It's okay," or, "It's just a joke." I was just a child, completely unprepared to handle what was happening. Each time we returned home from a party, I told my father something was wrong, that Diddy and his friends were doing things that scared me. He would listen but never look at me, brushing it off with, "You're exaggerating, Jasmine. They're your friends," or worse, pretending not to hear me and quickly changing the subject. At the time, I couldn't understand why my father wouldn't believe me, but now, as I look back, it has become clearer. I realized my father was scared, afraid of losing his job and of standing up to Diddy. He earned a good living, and we had a comfortable life because of it, but as a child, all I saw was a father who chose money over protecting his daughter. Feeling abandoned, I kept everything inside because I had no one else to turn to, and that loneliness was almost as unbearable as the dark rooms. Over the years, my relationship with my father became strained. I had admired his hard work, driving for Diddy day and night, battling traffic, and working overtime so I could have everything I needed, but after what happened at so many parties, I saw it differently. I told him about the dark rooms, about what Diddy and his friends did, and how scared I was, but he always reacted the same way. He pretended not to hear, claimed I was making it up, or changed the subject. When I insisted, he'd get angry, saying, "Jasmine, do you know how hard I work for this job? Please stop this." The worst part was knowing that he understood. I could see it in his eyes and in the way he avoided looking at me directly, yet he chose to ignore it. When I talked about what was happening, my father knew. He just didn't want to admit it. I think he was afraid that facing the truth would mean risking everything: his job, his salary, our home. Over time, I stopped telling him, stopped trying to make him listen. I felt like a burden, as if my pain was an inconvenience he preferred to ignore. So, I started keeping everything to myself, but it suffocated me. Every time I came home from a party or event, it felt like a weight was crushing my chest. The worst part was knowing that even at home, I wasn't safe. My father started watching me more closely, not to protect me, but to scold me. He said I was getting into trouble, that I needed to be more obedient and grateful for what we had. I didn't understand how he could think that way. I was just a teenager. It wasn't my fault, but he made it feel like it was. I felt betrayed. How could he allow this to continue? How could he ignore what was happening right under his nose? Even now, I wonder if his silence came from fear or convenience, but I'll probably never know. His silence was deafening, and he left me alone when I needed him the most. The father I thought would always protect me chose the comfort of financial security instead. I couldn't trust him, I couldn't trust anyone. Little by little, I started planning how I could escape, but back then, I was just a scared teenager, left to fend for myself while the person I needed most turned his back on me. I felt like I was trapped in a cycle I would never escape. When I turned 14, things only got worse. Diddy and his friends kept calling me into the dark rooms at parties, but by then, I had a better understanding of what was really happening. The innocence I once had was slowly fading, replaced by a growing sense of despair that seemed to get worse every day. I began to withdraw emotionally, avoiding conversations, parties, or anything that could lead me down that path again. But it didn't matter. Diddy had complete control over my father, and through him, over me. He gave orders, and my father obeyed without question. Even when I begged to stay home, my father would say, "You have no choice. It's work, Jasmine. You need to understand." Their control over my life felt suffocating. I couldn't leave the house without telling my father where I was going. He said it was for my safety, but it felt more like a way to keep me under Diddy's control. My school life started to suffer. I couldn't concentrate, and my grades fell. When teachers noticed something was wrong, I made excuses because the fear of telling the truth was stronger than anything else. Diddy began sending me gifts, expensive clothes, jewelry, even a new phone, all in front of others. He acted like a generous godfather, always saying, "I want you to have the best, Jasmine," with a calculated smile, but I knew those gifts came with a price, one I never wanted to pay. The worst part was how my father reacted. He told me to be grateful and accept the gifts without complaining, saying, "Do you know how many people would want to be in your shoes?" But all I wanted was to escape. As the years passed, I felt my identity slipping away. I was no longer Jasmine Clark, a girl with dreams and hopes. I was just the driver's daughter, a piece in their game that they could control and manipulate as they wished. No matter how hard I tried to find a way out, it felt like all the doors were locked, and I was always under the watchful eye of my father and Diddy's people. I was terrified of trying to escape and failing because I knew the consequences would be severe. At 16, I began seriously planning my escape, knowing I needed time, patience, and a chance to wait for the right moment. Until then, I had to hold on, even though each day felt like an eternity. After fleeing to Canada, my life changed, but not in the way I expected. Even though I was far away, the memories still haunted me, nightmares of dark rooms, whispered threats, and cold stares that pierced my soul. I couldn't stand being alone in a room with the door closed, and every loud sound or knock on the door would freeze me in fear, thinking that Diddy or someone from his circle might show up to take me back. I experienced constant pain, panic attacks, and cried for no reason, feeling like my mind was trapped in a cycle of fear and anguish. My grandmother did everything she could to help, taking me to a therapist who, for the first time, made me feel like I wasn't crazy. Explaining everything that happened was painful, and I felt ashamed, as if it were my fault for enduring it all. I constantly asked myself why they chose me, why I didn't fight harder, but the therapist helped me understand that none of it was my fault. She explained that they used their power and influence to manipulate, isolate, and convince me there was no way out. Their game was to break me down until I had no strength left to resist. Even so, recovery is still a long journey. Little by little, I began to process what had happened, remembering moments I had buried deep inside, times when I felt like an object, a piece to be used and discarded. The worst part was realizing that, while I was suffering, those people continued to live their lives as if nothing happened. They were still on stage, winning awards, and being idolized by millions, and every time I saw Diddy's face in the news, my body would shake. The same was true for his friends, celebrated as if they were untouchable. I began to feel afraid to tell my story, realizing that their power wasn't just about money or fame, it was about controlling the narrative and making the world believe their version of events. They were seen as heroes, while their victims remained invisible. One of the hardest moments came months after I ran away when I received an anonymous message on a messaging app. It said, "Do you think you can run away? We always find a way." I deleted the message immediately, but the fear it sparked stayed with me. At 19, I tried to start over by working at a local store, but every new customer felt like a threat, as if they were sent by them to find me. I couldn't trust anyone. Around that time, I began struggling with my reflection. Every time I looked in the mirror, I saw a fragile, broken person, someone who might never overcome everything that happened. But with the help of my grandmother and therapy, I began to understand that these scars were reminders of what I had survived, and that despite everything, I was still here. Even today, there are bad days, days when I can't get out of bed, when the weight of my past feels like it will crush me, but there are better days, too. On those days, I remember that I escaped, that I'm alive, and that they can't touch me anymore. These days give me hope that, one day, the memories won't feel so heavy. When I first decided to tell my story, I had no idea what to expect. During a therapy session, my psychologist encouraged me to write about what happened. She said it might help me process the trauma and potentially help others who have gone through something similar. After weeks of writing and deleting, I gathered the courage to share my experience on an anonymous internet forum. The text was long and detailed, each word feeling like it was tearing a piece of my soul away. At first, the support was overwhelming, with people telling me they believed in me, that I was brave, and that what happened to me was an injustice. For a moment, I felt heard, like my voice finally mattered. But soon, the hate messages started pouring in. Some called me a liar, claiming I just wanted attention, while others insinuated that I was trying to exploit Diddy's fame. One person even commented, "Why didn't you tell me before? It seems like you're trying to cash in on it now that it's getting attention." Those words cut deeper than anything. The worst part was when a tabloid found my post and published an article with my name and a childhood photo of me, without my consent. Suddenly, my face was linked to the story, spreading across websites and social media, and the reactions became even more intense. People attacked me, defended Diddy, and even made jokes about the dark rooms, with one comment saying, "She probably wasn't even forced, she just regretted it later." That one made me cry for days. Still, I refused to take down my story, because despite everything, I also received messages from other abuse victims, some naming the same people as me. Their stories gave me the strength to keep going. Even so, the fear never completely went away. I knew I was up against extremely powerful men. I had nightmares that they would find out where I was, that they would break into my house, or make me disappear like they had done to so many other girls. Paranoia followed me everywhere, in every move I made. My father found out about the story when it was published, and he tried calling me several times, but I didn't answer. What could he say? "I'm sorry." That wouldn't erase the years of silence, abandonment, and leaving me to face all of it alone. No, I didn't need him now. The hardest part is that, to this day, some people still don't believe me. They say I'm exaggerating, that it can't be true. But the truth is, I don't tell my story for them, I tell it for those who know what it's like to feel trapped, to feel like there's no way out. To them, I say, I know it seems impossible, but you can escape, you can survive. I carry this burden every day, but I choose to use my voice as a form of resistance because silence never helped me, it only fueled their power. Today, I try to find peace, but I know I'll never be completely free from what happened. The marks are there, not just in my mind, but in the way I relate to the world. I don't trust easily, I avoid crowded places, and the thought of being around someone famous makes me feel sick. Still, I'm alive, and that's something no one can take away from me. After telling my story, I knew I couldn't stop there. Even with the fear of retaliation, I felt I had a greater obligation to help other girls and women who, like me, felt silenced and alone. I began working with organizations that fight against abuse and trafficking, giving talks with my face partially covered, because it's not about me, it's about the message. The journey hasn't been easy, and the threats kept coming. I once received an email saying, "You should have kept quiet. You don't know who you're dealing with." I was terrified, but I didn't respond. I deleted the email and moved forward. The hardest part is knowing that, despite everything, these people are still out there, with influence, money, and the power to manipulate narratives. I know Diddy and other men like him will probably never face the justice they deserve, and that revolts me, but it doesn't paralyze me. I also think a lot about my father. He never reached out to me personally after I published my story. I think he knows his words wouldn't be enough. Sometimes, I wonder if he lives at peace with himself or if the weight of his choices has finally caught up with him. I want to forgive him, but I can't, not yet. Despite everything, I've decided that my past will not define who I am. I continue therapy and work to transform my pain into something that can help others. I won't lie, there are days when I feel exhausted and wish I had never told my story. But then, I get messages from other victims, people who say my courage inspired them to seek help, and that gives me strength to continue. I still carry a deep fear, always wondering if I'm being watched, if one day they will try to silence me forever. But until then, I'll keep talking because I know silence is their greatest ally. My story is just one of many, but if it can light the way for someone else, then all the suffering will not have been in vain. I chose to survive, and as difficult as it is, I choose to fight every day for justice, not just for myself, but for all the victims they tried to erase. I know that one day, their power will crumble, and until then, I'll do everything I can to make sure the world knows the truth.